I booked the planetarium after hours. Constellations don't lie. I didn't book the dome to look at stars. I booked it to find out who I was in the dark when no one was staging daylight for me. The text came at 11:06 p.m., polite as a resignation. Calibration ran late. Telescope mount is still off, might crash on the office couch. Don't wait up. Alina never said calibration when she meant overtime, and she never said telescope mount unless she wanted me to picture her with the colleague who could lift it without making a sound. It wasn't jealousy. It was geometry. If I knew where people stood, I could tell whether they were close by accident or design. The planetarium sits behind the museum like a secret the city keeps forgetting it has permission to share. The night attendant is a woman named Me who keeps the keys like a librarian keeps endings. When I walked in, she looked up from a crossword and studied whatever the dome's reflection put on my face. "You have the midnight," she said, matter of fact. "Teacher's show is loaded. Nobody'll bother you but the old air." Then she added what the best night workers say before you ask for it: no judgments after 2. The universe closes the courtroom. I tipped her because I wanted a witness who wouldn't testify. The dome settled over me the way velvet settles over the truth. Projectors blinked awake like careful animals. I set my phone on the armrest and waited for it to decide if it was brave. Outside, the museum's HVAC argued with itself. Inside, the sky prepared to lie less. Alina arrived at 12:03, backlit and too calm, wearing the black sweater that ruins my patience with furniture. She stood for a second in the entry halo, starring up like she'd forgotten which promises she'd already cashed in. Then she saw me, and the minute she'd been rehearsing exhaled. "Miles," she said softly, like a warning to a better version of me, "you booked the stars." "I booked the room with a ceiling that doesn't care how well we've been speaking," I said. "They said no judgments after 2. She smiled with one corner of her mouth, the corner that forgives accidents but not choreography. "Me's a good priest," she said. "I told Darius to go home. He didn't argue. He said his father taught him to stop carrying things when the clock began wondering who it was." She took a breath that tasted like long coffee and metal. "You didn't have to drive here to watch me not cheat." "I didn't," I said. "I came to find out whether wanting is weather or construction." She stepped toward the seats and sat one down from me, which is the kind of distance you use when you intend to tell the truth but refuse to invite a verdict. Darius followed a minute later, not because he had permission, but because he had returned to hand a leaner, the telescope mount, and whatever else he thought she might drop on the way out of the night. He stopped at the door when he saw me, which I respected. There are men who know how far their body can stand from a married woman without asking her to translate. He is one. His hands had the kind of carefulness that comes from moving valuables and the dignity of not having to name them. "Miles," he said, nodding as if my name had always belonged to a solution rather than a complaint. "Me says you rented space. I can leave you to it. You can sit and listen to the ceiling tell us if it intends to be honest," I said. "If it makes me feel petty, I'll give you a receipt on the way out." He laughed once at the right volume, then did the decent thing, "I'll go hand me the keys," and left without scraping anyone on the way past. The show began with a dim hiss and an apology. The projector pulled a night over us that remembered our childhood and forgave our adulthood. Summer constellations found their angles. Winter ones kept their secrets. Alina watched the sky like a person being asked for ID by a story. I watched her profile the way men watch the edge of a cliff they've known since they were boys. "Did you kiss him?" I said. It came out like a question I wanted to survive rather than a case I wanted to win. "No," she said after an honorable pause. But I stood where a kiss could learn my name. I wanted to prove to myself I knew the distance. I wanted to feel my neck pay attention. I wanted to be interesting again without auditioning for ruin. She turned her face toward me. Light from Orion's belt made a careful line along her cheek. If I wanted to be dumb, she said, I know how. I wanted to be awake. That's worse sometimes. I reached over the empty seat and touched the inside of her wrist with 2 fingers. The pulse there is the only thing I've ever learned quickly. She didn't pull away. We sat like that while a voice I didn't mind hearing explained how starlight gets to us by remembering our names for so long it confuses itself with testimony. Invite me next time, I said, when I trusted the ceiling to give me the sentence in my own voice. Invite me when you're interesting, not just when you're frightened. I am inviting you, she said. This is what it looks like. She slid to the seat beside me and took my hand properly. Her fingers were cold from the equipment. I warmed them and pretended it made a difference to the weather the night kept behind the projector. Above us, the sky changed hemisphere without complaining. Elena turned my palm over and pressed her mouth to the base of my thumb, that small and ridiculous place where I keep faith. It wasn't a promise. It was a map. Darius asked me if I wanted to stay for one last calibration, she said. I told him I had a reservation under my husband's impulse. He said, I know that man. He was being generous, which is a habit I forgive every day. Do you like him? I asked. I like the part of him that stands still and lets other people take themselves seriously, she said. I like that he doesn't use competence as a way to borrow desire he doesn't intend to pay back. She looked up at Cassiopeia and made the kind of sound you only make when you've stopped being clever. I don't want him, she said. I want me while you're watching. I kissed her, not to erase the conversation or notarize ownership, but because the dome had made us honest enough to put my mouth where the sentences lived. She returned it with relief and fury in equal measure, 2 kinds of honesty that do not share chairs. I slid my palm along her jaw and down the line of her neck and felt her breath choose a position. We kept our clothes. We kept our lives. We let our mouths admit what the day files under budget. We should walk the sky, she said against my cheek, an inches away whisper that hotels and courtrooms aren't built to hear. If we lie on the back row, they don't mind. Me likes people who use the dome the way most people use therapists. I am a back row man. We lay down and the arch of the room became a shoulder. Elena curled on her side with her back to me, and I set my palm flat across her ribs. This is the legal daytime version of touch we keep for nights that try to ask too many questions. Under the soft of her sweater, I felt the animal in me put its head down. Above us, the show explained how everything that looks connected isn't, and yet is, and how that's not a metaphor so much as a service. Do you want me to hit him? I asked the dark. No, she said. I want you to be the man who would and then didn't. I like that man. I slept with that man when I used to fall asleep with all the lights on. She rolled toward me, pressed her forehead to mine, and smiled in a way only people who have decided to be exact get to keep. We kissed again, this one slower, as if the dome could be made jealous. My fingers slipped under the hem of her sweater and found the warmth the night was refusing to negotiate on my behalf. Her hand fisted in the front of my shirt and held me there, not urgently but with competence. We kept the law of YouTube and broke the law of pretending to be fine. There are ways to be erotic that don't require spectators. We used one. Halfway through the show, the narrator confessed that certain stars we see are already dead, and that our job isn't to litigate the delay but to love the travel. Elena laughed quietly at the exact pride in the sentence, and I pushed my face into the curve of her neck and remembered the smell of her hair at the first apartment, the one with no door that closed properly, the one where we ate cold noodles over the sink, and she let me convince her the future would be courteous. I said her name, and she said mine the way you talk to the wrong animal, so it leaves you in peace. When the lights came up, we sat as if we hadn't decided anything and had decided everything. She straightened her sweater, and I failed to help because I was remembering how hands learn to be good at certain tasks and then act surprised at their own competence. Me came in, took one look at our faces, and handed me a paper cup of water that could have been absolution if I believed in that kind of currency. No verdicts after 2, she reminded me, which I knew she hadn't forgotten. And then she smiled at Alina the way night women smile at other night women in rooms that permitted bravery. Darius was waiting in the lobby with his tote and his keys and his grace. He nodded at me and then at Alina and then, because he is exactly as careful as he needs to be, at me. Mount is sleeping, he said. Sky will let children lie to it again in the morning. He started to go, then turned back to me with a look that admitted nothing and apologized for less. You two looked like people who used the dome correctly, he said. I like seeing municipal services enjoyed. We didn't shake hands. We didn't need to. He left with the small, tired, fast walk that belongs to men who refuse to treat their competence as rent. Alina and I stood together in the stupidly honest light and said goodbye to the ceiling in case it missed us. At breakfast at 9, the volunteers fought gravity with coffee and tape and parental hope. Alina moved through the room with clipboard grace. Darius stacked chairs like the world hired him to make weight behave. I did my tasks like a man who had been disarmed of every glamorous mistake and asked for dull ones instead. When Alina passed me, she touched my wrist in the legal daylight way. It felt like the unexpensive part of love people forget to bring when they shop for new. We never made a sport of telling the planetarium story after that, but we didn't hide it from ourselves either. On nights when the apartment tried to pretend it was a courtroom, we walked the 3 blocks and stood outside the museum to look at the blank curve of the dome and ask if the narrator would forgive us a rerun. Sometimes she texted come and meant stand next to me while I do the thing I am proud of. Sometimes I texted come and meant let me adore you before I get good at avoiding you again. Sometimes we sat on the front steps and named 5 constellations we could agree were lies, and one we would let onto our coat of arms if it promised not to argue. We did not stop admiring other people's competence. We did stop confusing it with a vote. Heat is a temperature, not a majority. We remembered to eat before we tried to win. We went to bed when the clock grew unkind. We let our hands be useful in the small daytime ways that make night think twice about hearing trouble. If you came for scandal, I owe you a worse dome and a better tabloid. What I have is a ceiling that refused to testify against us, a man who knew where to stand without being a sermon, and 2 people who learned to love arrival times more than verdicts. Constellations don't lie. We do. But if you stand under them at the right hour, they remind you that all your best betrayals happened in the light you brought, and all your best forgivenesses did too. When the show ends, you hold the person you didn't throw away. You walk into a lobby that forgives the shape of your night, and you go home in a body that has been permitted to be believed.